So good morning. My name is Travis Dawson with the NASA IV&V program here in Fairmont. This morning I'm going to talk about a concept new to NASA IV&V, or at least within the last year or so new, called a technical reference. So motivations for the technical reference. First, what is one? The definition, we get the actual formal definition for the technical reference from the contract statement of work. It's IV&V's understanding of the system's need, developed in parallel with other IV&V activities and referred to as the IV&V technical reference. So why do we need one? One is as objective evidence to either confirm or deny that software artifacts are correct and complete. It's one source for identifying how the system's software should behave or perform. We use the IV&V technical reference to document the evidence needed based on our work. So the summary bullet at the bottom, so most of those are quotes again from the statement of work. But in short, it's one component of providing evidence-based software assurance, which is one of the primary goals of the facility. Yesterday, I talked about another aspect of that, which was the idea of using assurance cases as one means providing evidence-based assurance. This is another component, fills a different role in that quest for evidence-based assurance. In addition to that primary goal for the technical reference, there's some additional benefits. It does enhance communications. The technical reference itself actually forms a terrific foundation for report writing, any communications between IV&V and the developers, IV&V and its other stakeholders. It captures some of the aspects of the system that can be used for later missions. We have a lot of commonality between our missions, our target missions, meaning the missions that IV&V is evaluating. And there's product lines of software where a developer will use the same product line with just slight modifications for a follow-on mission. So it captures and documents a lot of the work. And also, not necessarily for reuse. The third bullet, distinguished from the second, is it's basically your document of record of the IV&V work, or forms part of the document of record of your IV&V work for later use if necessary. So what does one look like? Again, it's a knowledge repository that contains our understanding of the system. Now that understanding can be synthesized in part from the developer artifacts, and this little sub-bullet is in here specifically to put to bed a certain idea of that it has to be developed entirely independently. It does not have to be developed entirely independently. It contains specific project relevant criteria, and it also contains non-project specific IV&V developed and outside developed standards, evaluation criteria, and references. So those two bottom bullets are, and we're going to go into a little more detail here in a minute, but really kind of form the two different fundamental categories of components of the technical reference: product-specific descriptions and non-product specific criteria. Again, it documents the materials IV&V used in performing our analysis, has a strong tie to evidence-based assurance, and I made that comment just as a lead-in comment, not even on the chart, but the second part of that bullet does not contain the evidence itself. So its role, and we'll go into, in fact, I hope to spend most of the time talking about how the technical reference actually works in IV&V analysis and how that flow works. So it's got a role in evidence-based assurance, but it's not the evidence. And IV&V issues and risks are not part of the technical reference. IV&V issues and risks are two types of products or outputs of the IV&V processes that the technical reference supports generating. Over time, so content is elaborated and updated as the IV&V project progresses. So one important aspect here is that the technical reference development is not a standalone phase of the IV&V project. So we don't start at the beginning and say, okay, we're going to build a technical reference. When we get the technical reference done, we'll start doing IV&V. It does grow, and so it's kind of got a just-in-time aspect to it, where as you begin a given analysis effort, you need to have the technical reference in place to do that analysis. And it's defined for a given project, and that's really just more of convenience. In other words, we take curiosity, a closed out project from IV&V's perspective at the moment, but if you take curiosity as an example, we would talk about curiosity's technical reference. However, that's really just a convenience. The technical reference kind of lives in the context of a given IV&V analysis activity. So what could be part of the technical reference for one activity could be an output of a prior activity. So again, it's an activity-specific context, but we don't talk about 47 different technical references. We talk about the project's technical reference, which is really just the sum total of all of those elements. So what's in one? Getting a little more specific. Heritage report, one of the first reports IV&V does, where we document both the developer's heritage and our heritage. So what are the heritage projects that developers are drawing from? What work has IV&V done on the system before? What did we find before? What did we not do? All that goes into a heritage report, and that forms part of our understanding of the system. Has kind of a little bit of a unique role in that, again, it's one of the first things we generate. So it's our first introduction to the system in many cases. System goals and system level behaviors, which are developed by IV&V, as a one way to characterize the system. Again, early in the IV&V planning cycle, it supports some of the different planning and scoping efforts, which is the next goal: planning and scoping products, context diagrams. So here we're talking about actually IV&V developing some model of the system. Any diagram that we generate to capture our understanding. Use cases, another common example, we often use use cases as one way to capture scenarios. We're doing more and more scenario-based work, and those scenarios themselves take the form of a use case, which kind of, I guess, is a little bit redundant with the last bullet. Continuing, so product-specific criteria. We've talked about the 3 questions. I don't have them here for reference, but IV&V bases much of its work on the concept of 3 questions, fundamental questions we ask about the system. Does the system or software perform as it should? Does it not do what it should not do? And how does it act under adverse conditions? Paraphrasing. So if you're going to evaluate the system against adverse conditions, one of the things you might want to have is a list of such adverse conditions or a list of undesired behaviors. Now, those can certainly grow, be based on or evolve from prior experience, prior missions, but they will be somewhat mission specific. Those are examples. Interface characteristics derived from an ICD. IV&V developed references and criteria. The really good example there is the architecture analysis assessment criteria. We went through an effort a few years ago to develop such criteria and have documented that, and it's part of one of our methods. So it doesn't apply to a specific project, but it was IV&V developed. Domain-specific questions derived by IV&V. We've got a set of DN&C evaluation criteria, for example. And then outside references and criteria. And this is just one of many, many examples, of course. But if you're evaluating a system's 1553 implementation, then Mill Standard 1553 would certainly be a part of your reference material. So in the process, and again, this is where I hope to spend a bit of time. So the project artifacts are up here in the upper left-hand corner. Are we seeing the mouse up here? Okay. The product artifacts are here in the upper left-hand corner, and there's 2 categories of those. There's a target artifact, which means what am I actually evaluating in this particular analysis effort, and then other product artifacts, which of course support and provide context for, and in many cases requirements for the target artifact. Okay, those can inform the technical reference. So I said that earlier, is it doesn't have to be 100% independent. So there is a path by which data from the product artifacts helps you develop your technical reference. Then the technical reference has these 2 broad categories of components that I referred to earlier. Supplemental representations is just one term for that broad category of items where IV&V captures its understanding of the system and criteria, which can come from either outside sources or IV&V sources that we show here. Now, the technical reference, we don't just incorporate wholesale product artifacts, because that might kind of meet the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. So what we do instead is reference product artifacts. And then both those elements, the technical reference and the artifacts, support the IV&V analysis. And evidence, again, is here primarily to show that that is an output of the IV&V analysis. Technical reference is an input of the IV&V analysis. And the evidence here, I guess I should say, is in kind of a formal structured assurance case sense. It's what supports your final conclusions. The technical reference, I guess, could be considered evidence, but it would be evidence that supports the analysis you performed. Okay, these two charts are they basically say everything I just said, just kind of for completeness. So I will skip those. So documenting the technical reference. When this first was kind of rolled out to the IV&V program, which was earlier this year in around the February, March timeframe, the idea of having a master list was really just convenience, you know, a way to quickly index and use keywords and find technical reference components. And so that was really kind of its only role. But as time has gone on over this year, I've come to realize that the reference master list is actually kind of more important than that. Its role has grown. Instead of being just a way to look up things, in many ways, the master list defines your technical reference. You've got potentially hundreds of components of your technical reference, many of them collected in a product repository, but many of them referenced outside the project or even outside IV&V if you're referring to, again, IEEE standards or anything else. You don't copy those in. You refer to them here. And this, you can't really read this. It does show it's an Excel spreadsheet. The next slide, I've got the fields. Okay, so not going through each of these, most of them are somewhat obvious. I would just kind of maybe categorize them. The first couple are, again, just kind of that index, look up, where do I find the thing? The second set of fields here, activity for which intended and role in activity, they kind of they reinforce the point I made earlier that these have a technical reference as an activity context. What's actually in the technical reference, where did it come from, version and a date. Now this is version and date of the technical reference component, and of course any comments you might want to make. So impact on IV&V analysis. You know, using reference materials, using standards, using evaluation criteria, using documented processes, those are all part of traditional mass IV&V. So there's nothing revolutionary or fundamentally is a fundamental change to IV&V here. So there's really very little impact on IV&V analysis, and any impact there is should be fundamentally positive, or should primarily be positive or beneficial. So the obvious next question then is, okay, so if it really doesn't change anything, then why do we need it? What does it do for us? And I guess the point I would make here is that while I said earlier that part of any well-run IV&V project already uses all of this, it will shock you to find out that not all projects since the beginning of the IV&V facility have been all that well run. This provides a structure and an expectation and a common vernacular for conversation to ensure that we are providing the necessary reference material. Too often, and I talked about this in a lot more detail yesterday, but on evidence-based assurance, but too often a product is handed to an expert, the expert reviews it, the expert writes issues, and then you're done. The list of issues is the documentation. This is a way to basically tease out some of that reference material and capture it. So going forward, I believe this is my last chart. So going forward, I just wanted to throw this chart in here to show that it is part of kind of an overall strategy. The technical reference characteristic until recently, until say spring of this year, was kind of more just an umbrella concept, meaning that we could put our arms around a set of things and call that the technical reference, but it wasn't really formally defined. We're now on ECM base. ECM stands for Enterprise Content Management. That's our it's a live link instance that's used at the facility where all of our work is captured. It's again a document repository. So all the stuff now is basically in a folder for a given project on ECM. But we're moving to more of a data view. Project profile is a in development concept for providing a view of a lot of the data for various projects. And then eventually to IV&V data management base, which is more of a data warehousing and data architecture view of our work. And there's some parallel relevant efforts going on there. The IV&V data management or data architecture concepts are under work, have been for, as you know, notionally for a small number of years now, but definitely with this last year ending, FY13 that's ending now, and then with FY14, that work is going to be stepping up. As that moves into implementation, it'll kind of support this evolution of the technical reference. SWAT is software assurance team, tools team. Software assurance tools team is the group that provides the various analysis tools we use. So as they move from an online data store architecture to a data warehouse architecture, again, that's part of the evolution. And analysis management framework, CD capability development effort. So as analysis management framework, which is the work I was telling you is going on in FY13, as that moves from kind of development and concept into implementation, then that's again part of an overall strategy here at the IV&V. So that completes what I had to say. Any questions?
Any questions in the room? I have a question online. Should the technical reference produce IV&V understanding of the entire system, or should it address only information gaps in developers' artifacts?
It should address IV&V's complete understanding of the system and not just gaps. Now, what that means is, to some people, when they hear that answer, they think that means I've got to now duplicate or replicate, reproduce, or waste a lot of time developing something that already exists. And I talked earlier in the one chart, I don't know if it's worth kind of going back here, but I talked earlier in this one chart about the idea that we use references to project artifacts. So we don't replicate or duplicate. We can simply point to a location of certain content. We don't have to duplicate it, but then by reference, the technical reference itself is as a standalone and complete representation.
Are there any questions on the phone?
If participants on the phone would like to ask a question, please press star 1 at this time. One moment, please.
If there's no questions on the phone, we have one here in the room.
We have one question from the phone. One moment.
Okay.
We don't have a name to announce, so if you did queue up to ask a question, please go ahead. Your line is open.
Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Please check your mute button.
Sorry for that. All right. Hi, Travis. This is Khalid. Just a quick question. We have 3 sets of documents while performing one of the IV&V activities. The first is obviously the target document. The second one is supporting documents like, or we also call them input documents. And the third one is TR. Let me give you the example for the first one. Say we are doing the code analysis, so we have the flight software code files. Then the input documents are like SRS or interface control documents or coding standards. So would you qualify any one of these as pure inputs to this analysis activity and the rest as TR? Thanks.
I guess if I understood the question correctly, I would say that there are project artifacts that don't have to be part of the technical reference. So yeah, you could have, I think pure inputs was the term you used. So technical reference represents IV&V's understanding of the system. It's also possible to have reference artifacts that are just, for example, just data files, a command dictionary, for example, might be something. I mean, you can call that part of your technical reference depending on what you're doing. And that goes back to what I've said several times now, that it's activity dependent. I think this also brings up a concept or a topic that I didn't put in here, but it has come up many times over the year, which is people become very concerned about whether a given input is part or not part of a technical reference. And the answer I have there is that the real key here is to ensure that all of our work is evidence-based, documented, and based on the necessary references. So if you draw a dashed line in one way and include that, and then or contract that dashed line and exclude a given artifact, it's not really, maybe splitting hairs a little bit. And so it's not, the main point is just to make sure as you start your analysis, you identify the need and fill the need for any reference materials to do the analysis. I hope I kind of closed your question there. And Joe, you had a
Yes,
question?
thank you.
Sure, Clete, thanks. Joe?
We have another question from the phone. It's Mary.
Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, hi, this is Mary. I assume this is great to have in a repository, and it's great for you technical people, but I assume your project management team can pull this information as well and leverage it into their projects?
Oh, certainly, certainly. The project management team and the analysts all use this. In fact, we just completed a review of the implementation, and this is a relatively new concept. So we've had 17 projects that are all implementing this since the spring, so not that long ago. And we just completed a review where we walked through every project's technical reference and to see how they are using it. And it does vary, and it is usable by people in a number of roles. Analysts, project management, and even program management can get a view of what we're doing.
Right. I think that's great. I could see its value in some upfront planning. Thank you.
Sure.
On the last slide, you had ECM as your near-term objective. But my understanding is that all projects should be using ECM to capture all the artifacts and documents and everything you're doing. So should be current?
Yeah, that's fair. I guess if you look at my slide, I've got recent and near term, so I kind of left out current, although I do have the line that says now, okay? So I'm saying, if you look at the vertical blue dash line, which says now at the bottom, I'm basically saying we are in, but early in that particular phase. So as of now, all projects do have a technical reference on ECM. Sure.
Any more questions in the room?
Yeah, Travis.
Hey, Neil.
You mentioned external criteria, and not every industry has nice standards like, say, IEEE standards. Do you have some guidelines as far as assessing qualities of external criteria? And pretty particularly, since I'm working on the ECT program, emergency communications guidelines tend to be much looser than what we're used to dealing with in the various space missions.
I think your point is an excellent one. I'm not sure. I guess I would say that this particular discussion is focused on what technical reference is and how we need to use it. How to actually fill some of the gaps in industry is maybe a little bit outside the scope of the conversation, but I will add, I mean, number one, I think it is a good question. I think it's a good represents a good observation, is that as many years and decades as we've been working in some of these different domains, it's somewhat amazing how little documented reference criteria there are in some cases. And so the analysis, I mean, the architecture criteria was IV&V developed. Now ECTP is kind of a unique case because it's a unique domain for IV&V. And so we don't have the shoulders of giants, you know, to stand on, and you're somewhat on your own, so to speak, as a product, not you individually, of course. And so I will say though, in terms of evaluating the goodness of the criteria, that is a significant effort in and of itself. In other words, I referred to the architecture analysis criteria development effort. That took 2 or 3 very senior and experienced folks, significant number of months to develop. Now, not 40-hour week kind of months, but it took them several months to develop. And so I think when you're talking about a significant domain and starting from somewhat a clean sheet of paper, it's a significant effort. So there's got to be a lot of review, et cetera. So.
Any more questions?
All right, thank you very much.